Episode 5, Benefits of Being a School Psychologist. Welcome to School Psych Finds, the podcast, a show where we'll explore various topics related to the fields of psychology, education, human development, and of course, school psychology. I'm your host, Sophia, a nationally certified school psychologist, and these are my School Psych Finds. Welcome back to the School Psych Finds podcast. On today's episode, we're going to fall in love with the career of school psychology. I'm going to explain some of the many perks and benefits of our job. And don't get me wrong, this career can also be extremely challenging and stressful, but there are a lot of benefits that I want to make sure we talk about and that we take time to celebrate and appreciate. Next week, I will be talking about the hardships of our career, and following that, we'll be talking about some of the ways to avoid burnout. But today's episode is dedicated to all of the benefits and wonderful things about our job. Before we begin, make sure to join our weekly newsletter, which is super brief but includes an overview of the week's episode, any quick information and updates, and a lot of additional resources and tips, and I'll leave the information on how to subscribe to that in the show notes. Whenever I get asked what the best part of my job is, I feel like I'm giving a really cliche answer, but it's really honest and true. And I think that in order to be a happy and successful school psychologist and one that doesn't burn out right away, this has to be a truth for you. The best part of my job is getting to work with kids and getting to see them grow and getting to help them. Now, this is really hard, challenging work, but it's extremely meaningful and rewarding. And so in order for it to be meaningful and rewarding, you really have to enjoy being around kids, helping figure out how they learn best, helping other people figure out how they learn best, and helping other people understand them and support them. Building relationships is such a big part of our job as a school psychologist, of course with the adults in the student's life, but really most importantly, directly with that child themselves. And one of the perks of being a school psychologist is we get to have a really special and unique relationship with students that other staff in the school building generally don't get to do. Of course, other mental health providers do this as well, but we have this role where we don't do any discipline with the student. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't hold them to certain standards and push them to achieve their goals and grow, but we don't have to be the discipline provider at school. We get to just be there for them, be someone there at school that's just there to hear them out and help them grow and succeed. And if they do something wrong, they can be disciplined by someone else if it comes to that. But I don't know that there are really too many other relationships in the school building where you get to just say, well, I'm not the person you get in trouble with, that's someone else, but I'm here to help make sure you're making good decisions and grow and succeed. The other really big thing about our job that can get lost sometimes in the day-to-day stressors is that this is a job where we really have a big ability to make a real impact in these students' lives. So again, whether that's through things like understanding how that student academically learns best, what their strengths and needs are, but also through helping build relationships with them and helping other people in their lives understand them better. We get to advocate for kids and families, and we get to help them get resources and really understand what works best for their child as a learner and socially and emotionally. The other really cool thing about our job is that we just get to see kids being kids, right? So a lot of times in our job as a school psychologist, we're going into classrooms to observe, we're going onto the playground to observe. So we get these moments of time in our day where we get to just watch and play with kids if you make the time for it, if that's something you value. And so especially at the elementary school level, this can really bring a lot of joy to your day, just going onto the playground and watching those kindergartners, say silly things, run around, chase each other. It can really bring a lot of joy to your day. The other kind of small perk about our job related to working in the school building is spirit days. Now, I know that sounds silly, but what other job do you get to wear pajamas to work sometimes? I'm guessing not many. All right, so let's get to one of the biggest and most obvious benefits of being a school psychologist, the amount of time that you have off. This is a question I regularly get asked is, as a school psychologist, do you get summers off? And the answer is yes. So we don't get as much time as students and oftentimes maybe not as much as teachers, but we do get a good chunk of time off. So let me just quickly explain how our job works as a school psychologist and how we're paid. So we're paid for the amount of days that we're contracted and we're salaried employees. So the average amount of days that a U.S. employee works outside of the school setting is 260 days. The average amount of days that a school psychologist works is 195. So that's about 2 months extra of time off than the average employee. Most school psychologists' contracts are between 10 to 11 months, but there are opportunities to be 12-month employees. Now, really quick disclaimer here is that we're not technically paid for that time off. We're paid an average of $75,000 per school year for the 195 days you're contracted for or whatever your agreement is. And so typically we get about a month or two off during the summertime, usually a couple weeks during winter, and then a week during spring break, and usually maybe a week or a half week during fall around Thanksgiving. The other thing to consider about the days that we're working is that those are the days we're contracted to work. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's always students during those days. So we have plenty of days as school staff employees where we're on contract, we're working, we're prepping things, we're doing professional development, we're holding meetings where we don't have students in the building, and that can be a break and a time where you get to prepare and help be more efficient during the school year. All those days that we either have off or have for prep are needed, and we probably need more if we're being completely honest, but we take what we can get, and it is a big perk because I don't know really many other jobs where you can have that many days off, paid or not, and still hold that job. In terms of the salary, I mentioned an average of $75,000 per year. I think that that is really decent given that it's a job in education, it's a job in social services, and all the time off that we get. I think that it's actually probably worth more than the $75K that it sounds like from the outside. We also, as public education employees, usually get pretty decent benefits, and we usually, as school psychologists, also qualify for some teacher discounts, which of course is just a little thing, but an extra little perk and fun thing to consider. Keep in mind, and I talk about this in some other episodes, like what is a school psychologist and how to become a school psychologist, $75,000 per year is an average nationally. It can vary quite significantly between states and districts and experience. I personally believe all school psychologists should make at a minimum $75,000 given their experience, training, and expectations on the job. Well, that's something we're certainly advocating for. Another really awesome thing about our job is that you have a high level of job security, and there's a lot of job growth in this career. So there are huge shortages nationally in school psychology. It's not a new problem, and it doesn't seem to be going away quite yet. So while there are definitely challenges related to that we'll talk about next week, it's a huge benefit in terms of being able to find a job. I don't say this lightly, and I don't think you can say this about very many jobs. Finding a job as a school psychologist is relatively easy. If you got through grad school training, you're going to be able to find a job. I think the latest research findings, and there aren't too many on this, are that over 99% of graduate students find a job as a school psychologist within their first year of graduating. And my personal experience and what I've heard from a variety of other school psychologists is that they're able to find a job if they want one. The other really cool thing is you can pretty much work anywhere in the country. And again, this is another unique thing about being a school psychologist that you don't really get in a ton of other careers. You have decent pay, you have high level of job growth and security, and you can really work anywhere in the country. It's really easy to move between states as a school psychologist, and it's also really easy to move between districts and essentially, what you might refer to outside of public education, different companies, different school districts. You also have the opportunity often to move between schools. Now, most people in public education, specifically teachers, have to apply directly to the school that they want to work with. Of course, once they get accepted by the overall school district, then they interview directly with that school. Typically, as a school psychologist, while that might happen, we're typically somewhat contracted in by the district itself. So usually you'll have your own kind of separate psychology department with your own supervisors and your own bosses, and they help to place you directly in those schools. And so it can be somewhat easy, depending on the district you're in, to ask to move to a different school setting, a different school. And you really get a lot of autonomy because, one, the nature of your job as a school psychologist, but two, usually your direct supervisor isn't the principal in the building. While yes, they're the boss of the school and you do need to work well with them, your supervisor, your direct supervisor, and the person you report to usually isn't within that school and is part of your overall psychology department. One of the top benefits, in my opinion, is the amount of autonomy that you have as a school psychologist. So if you're someone who is able to stay on top of yourself and be organized and doesn't like to be micromanaged, you might want to consider this job. Unless you're in a bad school district or have poor supervisors, you should not be getting micromanaged. You know what your tasks are, you know what you need to do in terms of your timelines to get it all done. And as long as you're doing all of that, you generally can set your own schedule, and it's really expected that you set your own schedule. So that's something to consider as a school psychologist, is you need to be able to manage your own time, and really a lot of different tasks that usually more than you can do in a set amount of time. But again, being able to figure out how you're going to do that yourself. Now, you obviously need to be in the school building during the hours that students are there. It's not a job that you necessarily come and go as you please, but in terms of how you spend the hours while you're there, you have a lot of flexibility. Obviously, a lot of times we're scheduled into meetings where you need to be there at certain times doing that exact task. But other than that, you can kind of decide like, okay, when I get into work today, I'm going to call this parent, or I'm going to respond to these emails, or I'm going to test this kid. You can decide whether you're going to go observe in a classroom. That's another cool thing about our job, is you can adapt your day to fit the tasks that you need to complete, but also a bit how you're feeling that day, right? Maybe today's not a day where you want to spend a ton of time directly talking and working with people as much. And so you're going to spend it report writing and prepping and analyzing data and documenting all the services that you've conducted. And another day you feel like you want to do all of that at once. Or maybe you're someone who likes to have a mix of that during different times. In some school districts, you really have a ton of flexibility, and you can say on Mondays I report write, on Tuesdays I test, on Wednesdays I do counseling. Now, we'll talk next week about some of the challenges of having everything go as planned, but I personally am someone who really values having all that autonomy in my day. And if you're someone who knows you want to work in public education, one of the other benefits of being a school psychologist is you aren't tied to a classroom all day. And so that goes back to the autonomy of being a school psychologist, is you don't have to find coverage for someone to watch your class while you go to the restroom or go talk to someone or have a call with a parent, right? Because those are all parts of our job. And a lot of times, but not always, you get a set office space, which we most definitely all should have given the types of tasks that we do and the confidentiality and sensitivity of our job. That's something with the shortages that we're still working on. So autonomy, if you think that that is essential to your job satisfaction, school psychology just might be for you if you also enjoy working with kids and helping families. The other unique thing about our job, given the ease in which you're able to find a job and work, is the type of work that you can do and the places that you can work in. So as I mentioned earlier, as a school psychologist, you can really work anywhere in the country. It's easy to find a job. You can also change the type of work that you do. So you have the option, of course, to work full-time. You also often have the option to work part-time. Since the pandemic, even more opportunities are growing for virtual and remote work. And you can even work as a contracted school psychologist where you're not directly hired by the school district for a set amount of days, but instead they're paying you to do set cases and contracted work. And so that gives you a lot more flexibility as well. If you're someone that's interested in pursuing other passions at the same time or also being with your family part-time. There is a ton of variety in our job. I always say that as a school psychologist, you will never be bored, or you should never be bored. Every single day is different as a school psychologist. Yes, some things are similar. A lot of things are similar, but the details and the nuances of all of those things differ because you're working directly with humans, and humans are nuanced and complicated. And I mean that both the humans that you're working with in terms of staff and parents, but I also mostly mean that with the students that you're working with. I think as a school psychologist, no matter how many years of experience you have, you're always going to come across kids that you have not experienced before and complicated situations that are new to you in some way. The other unique thing is you get to work with a variety of different ages if you want to, and different settings. So as a school psychologist, you have the option at working at a preschool, an elementary school, a middle school, a high school, a continuation school. And then within those schools, there are different settings for students who have special education needs. And so you have a bunch of different schools in those capacities as well that you can work in. On the episode, What is a School Psychologist?, I go into a lot more detail about the different settings that school psychologists can work in. So check that out if you haven't already, but there is a lot of opportunities for working in different settings as a school psychologist. So if you're ever bored, I recommend either switching the setting you're in, the school you're in, or even the district you're in. If you really want to get crazy, try going to a different state because things are incredibly different across states. You'll be really surprised. The other thing I think is a really big perk and is really important to think as a perk if you want to be a school psychologist is all the problem solving and data analysis we get to do. So if you're someone who likes to always be learning new things and always be solving problems and thinking deeply about things, you're probably going to enjoy being a school psychologist because we're always having different cases and profiles of students and having to brainstorm with others as well how to best support the student. This is also a career where you have to enjoy learning because best practices and research findings are constantly being updated, and you need to stay on top of that to be the most effective practitioner and school psychologist. So it's one of the kind of demands and requirements of being a school psychologist, but it's also a perk is that you constantly get to be evolving and learning new things. The last somewhat unique thing about being a school psychologist that I want to talk about is the amount of education that's required to become a school psychologist. Now, there are plenty of school psychologists that hold a doctoral degree, but it's not required to be a school psychologist within the school setting. So the average school psychologist has a specialist level degree, and I explain way more about this in the episode How to Become a School Psychologist. But I think that this is a huge benefit of the job and into getting people into this career field, is you don't have to go to grad school for 5 to 7 years and get a doctorate degree to practice as a school psychologist. You only need to have a specialist level degree. And I say only with the caveat that that still requires a total of 7 years of school after high school, right? So you have to get your bachelor's degree, that takes 4 years, and then you typically need to go to school for at least 3 more years. But for some people, that can make a huge difference in deciding what path to go down, because 3 years versus an additional 5 to 7 can make a big difference, not only in a person's life, but also in considering how much time off that you need for work and the amount of student loans you need to become a certain type of psychologist. And school psychologists are one of the only types of psychologists that are allowed to hold the title psychologist within their job title without holding a doctorate level degree. So I do think that's one of the unique perks of this job as well. Now, along with easily being able to find a job across states, you can also choose to work abroad. Now, I won't say that those options are endless, but I do know of school psychologists that work in international schools and DoD schools abroad. So again, this is a job where you have a lot of flexibility, not only within your school day, within your work day, the amount of hours that you work, but also where you work, not just in terms of the setting, but the actual location. So So if you're doing this right, you shouldn't get bored. And that's not to say that people don't get burnt out or want changes, but in terms of having passion in school psychology, there are so many benefits, and it's such a unique field with so many perks that I think sometimes are easy to take for granted. I think this is an amazing career that so many people don't know about. And so if you know anyone that is broadly interested in education, psychology, or working with children and families, please share this podcast with them and help them learn a little bit more about the amazing field of school psychology. As a reminder, next week we will be talking about all the hardships and challenges of school psychology, both to help other school psychologists feel seen and heard, but also if you're someone that's interested in this career, so you can really have a better understanding of both sides of what you're getting yourself into, because there also are a lot of downsides to being a school psychologist. If you haven't already, please make sure to leave a quick review for the podcast. It takes less than a minute to do and makes a huge difference for the podcast. I really appreciate it. And as always, please feel free to reach out to me. I love hearing from you all, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. Thanks for tuning in to the School Psych Finds podcast. Join our community by subscribing and following me on my other channels, which can be found in the show notes. Lastly, if you enjoyed the podcast, it makes a huge difference if you leave a quick review. I'll see you all soon for our next School Psych Finds.